Hi folks, in this video we're going to take a quick break from Australian content and head across the Tasman to Aotearoa, New Zealand. At the southern end of the North Island is the beautiful city of Wellington, which features a really remarkable suburban railway network. There are lots of things that make this system unusual, and I'm going to chat about those things in a moment, as well as highlighting some of the interesting geographic and scenic features of the network. But firstly, there's one thing about Wellington that really stands out as far as rail transport is concerned. In the Western world in general, it's usually considered a given that only large, heavily populated cities deserve serious heavy rail passenger transport systems. Despite being the nation's capital, Wellington is tiny. If you Google a population, you'll get a remarkably small figure of just over 200,000. However, that's actually just for the inner suburban area, and if you include the greater metropolitan area served by suburban trains, which I'm going to discuss here, the figure is closer to 500,000. But either way, it's not a big place, and to put it in perspective, the inner city area is quite comparable in size to somewhere like Hobart, Geelong, or Wollongong. Oh, and I'm just going to apologise in advance to my Kiwi friends if I mispronounce any place names, because I'm sure that I will. Before we look at the actual lines, it's worth taking a quick look at the geography of the area, because that is what has really made this city perfectly suited to good rail transport. The CBD is located on the western edge of Wellington Harbour. The surrounding area is quite mountainous, and you can clearly see on the satellite imagery how the suburban development has essentially spread in two long corridors, filling the low altitude areas between the mountains. This means that with just two main lines, a really high percentage of Wellingtonians live in close proximity to a suburban railway station. As a side effect, there are also some really beautiful and isolated feeling places close to the city, because the suburban development tends to skip any patches of really steep terrain. Okay, so let's look at the basic form of the network. Like all railways in New Zealand, the trains operate on 1067mm 3'6" narrow gauge. The suburban area is electrified at 1500 volts DC, the same as Melbourne and Sydney. In a slightly unusual arrangement, suburban trains, buses and ferries are managed by the Greater Wellington Regional Council under the trading name Metlink. No, not that Metlink. Although under that umbrella, the service is still operated by private franchises. All trains operate out of Wellington Station, which is a big 9-platform terminus at the northern end of the CBD. The network consists of 4 electrified lines, 2 very long ones that follow the 2 main suburban corridors, and 2 short lines that branch off close to the city. For the most part, these lines are served by a comprehensive timetable starting early in the morning and running late into the night with good frequencies and peak hour express trains, just like you'd expect in a big city. Diesel commuter trains also continue some distance beyond the wires on the 2 main lines. The Kapiti line is interesting in that it connects several patches of disconnected suburbia to the north of the city rather than travelling through continuous suburbs. This is the southern part of the North Island main trunk, the main line which ultimately leads all the way up to Auckland. Because of this, suburban trains share the line with fairly regular freight trains as well as the Northern Explorer, the long-distance passenger train that connects Wellington with Auckland. Shortly after leaving Wellington, the line climbs a ramp and plunges into the hillside entering Tunnel Number 1. Tunnel 1 is just over 1.2 kilometres long, after which trains emerge for a quick 250 metres of fresh air before entering the epic Tunnel Number 2, coming in a little over 4.3 kilometres. As far as I'm aware, this is the longest double-track railway tunnel in the Southern Hemisphere by quite a large margin, not including urban underground commuter lines, of course. These tunnels are part of the Tawa Flat deviation, which I'll talk about more in a minute. Beyond the tunnels, we reach the first station, Takaboo Road, having already travelled about 12 kilometres from the city. The line then continues along a valley to Pororua, then runs along the edge of the very scenic Pororua Harbour. The bridge at Parramatta is the only place I've managed to photograph a dolphin with a suburban train, so far. Continuing north, the line winds gently through open countryside climbing to Pukerua Bay. This is where the double track ends, and the line then makes a very steep and very scenic descent along the edge of the escarpment down to sea level at Paikakariki. There's a magnificent walking track above the railway along this section with spectacular views out to Kapiti Island. Just don't fall off. From Paikak, the line follows a less thrilling alignment to Waikanae, the terminus of electric operation. From there, a peak-only diesel-hauled train known as the Capital Connection operates as far as Palmerston North. This train operates with a single set of cars with just one return trip each weekday. The train is obviously aimed entirely at 9-to-5 city workers and is operated by KiwiRail rather than Metlink. In fact, it doesn't seem to even get a mention on the Metlink website. The other main line is the Hutt Valley Line, which initially skirts the edge of Wellington Harbour for about 7.5 kilometres out to Petone. The line is very close to sea level, and in rough weather it's not uncommon for trains to experience pretty heavy spray from the nearby waves. The line then follows the Hutt River, crossing it several times through fairly dense suburbia to Upper Hutt. where the electrification ends. Beyond there is the Wairarapa line, which dives through the Remataka Range in the 8.9km long Remataka Tunnel. This was built in 1955, bypassing the former steep winding route over the top of the mountain with grades as steep as 1 in 15, assisted by a fell rail system. Once through the tunnel, the line continues more sedately through a number of small rural townships before reaching the terminus at Masterton. Unlike the peak-only capital connection, the Wairarapa timetable features 3 peak direction trains plus a few others scattered throughout the off-peak times and weekends, and seems to be a very popular service. Back close to the city, the Johnsonville line is extremely scenic, winding up into the hills immediately out of Wellington. It's single track for its entire length and travels through dense leafy suburbia. The main scenic feature is the climb through the Ngaio Gorge, which feels quite remote despite being just a few minutes from the city. There's a nice walking track along the gorge which provides many places to photograph trains clinging to the forested hillside. This was actually the original main line out of the city, which was bypassed in 1937 by the construction of the Tawa Flat deviation which I mentioned earlier. Most of the original alignment was fortunately retained for this local service, which is a great transport asset today. The final line is the Melling Line, which is a short 2-station branch off the Hutt Valley Line from Petone. The Melling Line only operates roughly between 6am and 6pm on weekdays, with a sparse off-peak frequency and nothing on weekends. It doesn't really have any interesting features, and it's also the only Wellington line I haven't travelled on or photographed, so I don't really have anything else to say about it. Sorry, Melling. However, it does have essentially the same origin story as the Johnsonville line. It was originally part of the main alignment up the Hutt Valley, but was made redundant after a major deviation, again being smartly retained for the purpose of local trains. Speaking of trains, let's take a look at them. When the network was first electrified in the late 1930s, services were operated by a mix of electric locomotive-hauled trains and electric multiple units. The EMUs were these distinctive-looking steel-bodied cars ordered from English Electric, and amazingly, some remained in service until 2012. For electric traction enthusiasts, these were awesome trains to travel on with growling DC traction motors. In their later years of service, the English Electric sets were split into 2 groups. One group was captive on the Johnsonville line, and these were all 2-car sets, with a motor car at the Wellington end and a driving trailer at the Johnsonville end. The second group were used for peak services only on the Hutt Valley line. These were 3-car sets, consisting of a cabless motor car sandwiched by a pair of driving trailers. In the 1980s, a new fleet of EMUs was ordered from Hungarian manufacturer Ganzmavag. These trains were all in fixed 2-car sets, comprised of a motor car at the Wellington end and a driving trailer at the suburban end, just like the 2-car English Electrics. I quite liked the Gans sets, and thought they were very nice to travel on with a real 80s feel. At the end of 2010, a brand new fleet of trains began entering service to sadly replace the now ancient English Electric sets. These trains were built in South Korea by Hyundai Rotem and named Matangi trains, which means wind, something Wellington trains experience a lot of. I was quite impressed by the Matangis, and you can tell they were a highly customised design, achieving a distinctly Wellington look. They still have that distinctive New Zealand Railways barrel shape, and to me have a real functional and rugged look with the exposed MU cables, brake pipes and handrails. They were originally delivered with conventional knuckle couplings, hence all the exposed cables, but the later series sets were delivered with Scharfenbergs, and the earlier ones were later retrofitted. Continuing the tradition of earlier trains, the Matangis are also marshalled as 2-car motor driving trailer pairs, except flipped around with the motor at the suburban end. The original plan was to refurbish the Ganzmavag fleet and get a few more years of service out of them, and a single set was upgraded as a prototype. It looked really nice, but ultimately the decision was made that it would be more economical to just replace them, and the Matangi order was extended. They are now the only type of EMU in Wellington, which does make things a bit more boring for enthusiasts. The prototype refurb Gans set was saved from the scrappers and is now in storage at the Ferrymead Heritage Park in Christchurch. A conventional Gans set has also been set aside for preservation in Wellington by the Wellington Heritage Multiple Unit Trust. The 2 diesel-operated routes use trains comprised of heavily refurbished second-hand British Rail Mark II passenger cars, usually hauled by a DF-class locomotive. This is a good demonstration of just how tiny trains are in the UK, that these cars can fit the rather tight loading gauge on New Zealand's narrow gauge network. Jumping back briefly, in the late 2000s, before the arrival of the Matangi sets, the network was really desperate for rolling stock, and when I first visited in 2010, they were using some very creative solutions to fill those gaps. A trio of 1970s built EO-class locomotives from the South Island Otira Tunnel electrification were reactivated and used to run peak-hour suburban trains, top and tailing a set of the ex-British cars. 3 previously withdrawn English Electric sets were also returned to service in the historic red livery, although they received yellow fronts to meet modern visibility requirements. These consisted of a 3-car set named Cyclops, so named because it still had the original single headlight, and a pair of 2-car sets, one named Phoenix, which had been retrieved from storage at Hut Workshops, and another known as Red Robin, which had been preserved at Ferrymead. During my visit, they were all running together as a 7-car set on the Hutt Valley line, although sadly I didn't get a chance to ride it. All 3 sets were preserved once no longer required, with Phoenix accompanying Red Robin back to Ferrymead and Cyclops going to the Wellington Heritage Multiple Unit Trust. Jumping back to the map now, there is one remaining significant area of Wellington that isn't served by the rail network. Wellington Station is really on the northern outskirts of the CBD. Then there's this whole area to the south of the city, including the airport, which isn't served. The conspicuous absence of a railway line in this area is for the same reason that Sydney has large conspicuous unserved areas. That is, it used to be served by trams. Sadly, Wellington made the same mistake as Sydney and most other English-speaking cities and closed its tram network in the 50s and 60s. In an ideal world, I'd suggest building a new railway line that drops down from the existing main station, build an underground station more centrally under the CBD, then swing around to the airport and maybe terminate out on this peninsula. But then again, let's remember this isn't actually a very big place, and the area is served by a pretty comprehensive bus network. But you know, if this was Transport Tycoon, I'd definitely build it. So there you go. If someone ever tells you a small city can't have a good heavy rail suburban system, point them at Wellington. If you want to learn everything else there is to know about this lovely network, I suggest getting a copy of Wellington's Railways by David Parsons, although from a quick search it looks like it might be a bit hard to come by these days. Incidentally, that's my picture of Wellington Station on the front, which was the first time one of my photographs appeared on a proper book cover. So there's a fun fact for you. Anyway, thanks for watching.